Hi, I'm Iris. At my nephew's baptism, my sister called me childless in front of everyone. And then my son, my real son, ran up and called me Mommy. Out loud. They say family is forever, but mine rewrote history without me. They took my name off my child's birth certificate. They gave my baby blanket to someone else. They told him to call me anything but Mom. And the scariest part? They made sure everyone smiled while it happened. How do you stay quiet in a room built to erase you? And what happens when your silence finally runs out? I wasn't uninvited. Just not mentioned. That distinction haunted me as I stood in the parking lot of St. Matthias Church, hands wrapped around the too smooth leather strap of my purse, trying not to fidget like someone who didn't belong. Silas tugged gently at my wrist, his small hand sticky from the granola bar I gave him in the car. I'd wiped his mouth before we walked in, double-checked his sweater for stains. We weren't here to make a scene. We slipped in through the side entrance. Everyone else came in through the front, dressed in soft pastel colors and expensive shoes that didn't make a sound against the stone floor. I wasn't trying to make a statement, but I wasn't going to force myself through a door that never opened for me in the first place. The chapel was fragrant, floral arrangements everywhere, probably Vera's doing. She liked symbolism, purity, blessings, rebirth. She wore motherhood like a crown, and today, she was the queen of the ceremony. I stood by the bulletin board, watching families arrive in groups of 4 or 5, greeting each other with air kisses and exaggerated laughs. Most didn't notice me. The few who did gave a quick nod, a polite, tight-lipped smile. The kind you offer the UPS guy who delivers your packages, but you never invite inside. I checked the seating chart out of habit. There were 3 long tables labeled with family, one for church friends, and one near the back that said kids and overflow. My name wasn't listed anywhere. A woman I vaguely remembered from the church, Angela or Andrea, something like that, approached me, clipboard in hand. "Oh, Iris! Hey there! We didn't know if you'd make it," she said, eyes flicking toward Silas. I smiled, tight. "Surprise!" She hesitated. "We've got a free seat near the craft station, just over there with the kids. Hope that works?" It didn't, but I nodded anyway. The little table was a battlefield of crayon stubs, sticky name tags, and juice boxes. I sat down slowly, pretending I didn't notice the 2 empty seats at the main family table. Silas sat next to me, humming softly while peeling the label off his water bottle. I pulled out my phone, not because I needed it, but because it gave me somewhere else to look. I scrolled through nothing. The artificial glow let me hide my face. That table placement wasn't a mistake. It was a message. From my corner, I watched Vera float through the room like she'd choreographed it all. Her dress fit like a magazine spread, her makeup flawless, one hand resting on her nephew's shoulder, the other waving to a cousin she hadn't spoken to since high school. I used to think she was just lucky, born with the charm gene. But now I knew better. She rehearsed everything, even the casual touches, even the sincerity. I stared down at my lap and whispered to myself, I didn't come here to reclaim anything. I just didn't want them to think I disappeared. A church volunteer began handing out printed programs. Each had a soft watercolor border and cursive lettering across the top. Baptism celebration, in honor of Ezra Michael. Inside were photos. Vera holding the baby, Vera with Mom, Vera and Ezra in a field of sunflowers. My name appeared on the last page under special thanks, friends of the family, Iris Delara, friends of the family. I read it again, and then one more time. They'd listed neighbors, Vera's Pilates instructor, and the woman who helped arrange the flowers, all under family. But me, I was a footnote, a +1 to a bloodline I was born into. I folded the program in half, pressing the crease with my thumbnail. Then I folded it again and slipped it beneath my purse, like it had never been handed to me at all. I could have walked out then. No one would have chased me, probably wouldn't have even noticed, but I stayed. For him. Silas leaned his head against my arm, tired from the morning and all the new faces. He didn't ask questions about why we sat at a different table. He was 6. He just wanted cake. I looked at him, at the small curls pressed against his forehead, at the way his shoelaces came undone every 15 minutes because he insisted on tying them himself. He didn't know the kind of history that got edited when you weren't around to write it yourself. "They erased me from the table," I whispered, running my hand over the back of his little head. "They won't erase you." Silas stayed close as the church transitioned into the reception hall. He shuffled beside me, eyes locked on a slice of chocolate cake 3 tables away, but his little hand never left mine. We weren't moving fast, not because of him, but because I wasn't ready to face the room full of people who could look straight through me without blinking. I guided him toward our seats again, the same kiddie table beside the crafts bin. Some glitter had spilled since we left. Someone had stuck googly eyes onto the vase centerpiece like it was a joke. I sat down without adjusting my dress. I didn't bother smoothing the wrinkles anymore. Around us, voices rose like bubbles in a glass. Laughter, clinking glasses. That soft tone people used when they wanted to sound reverent, but still feel important. Then I heard her. Vera. She was standing near the front, a glass of something sparkling raised just above shoulder height. All eyes turned her way like she had a spotlight sewn into her collarbone. I didn't look directly at her. I watched her reflection in a serving tray someone left on the dessert table. "I just want to thank everyone for being here today," she began, the practiced lilt of her voice curling into every syllable. "Ezra is so lucky to be born into such a loving, tight-knit family." People nodded. A few gave those breathy, sounds Southern women love to hum during speeches. She wasn't done. "And I mean, this little guy has so much to learn. But hopefully someday he'll be able to teach his Aunt Iris a thing or two about diapers, right?" That landed like a slap disguised as a hug. The room burst into laughter, sharp, high-pitched. Even the pastor chuckled. I didn't move. My hands stayed folded on my lap, but my grip tightened around the strap of my purse until my knuckles blanched. No one said anything in my defense. Not my mother, not my aunt, not even Lacey, who once cried on my couch when her marriage fell apart and said I was the only person who made her feel like she wasn't crazy. They just laughed, like I was part of the act. That wasn't a joke. It was a warning shot. And it worked. The next 20 minutes passed in a haze. I nodded when people greeted me, but my smile stayed tight. My jaw hurt. I couldn't remember the last time I'd unclenched it. At some point, a woman I didn't recognize walked over with a half-full wine glass and the air of someone who knew exactly what she wanted to say. "Still single?" she asked, not even pretending to soften the question. I blinked. She laughed like we were old friends. "It's never too late to freeze your eggs, you know. They're doing amazing things these days." I looked her in the eye and said, "And it's never too late to not say that." She didn't laugh that time. She walked off, red in the face, and I heard her mutter something under her breath. Probably about me being sensitive. Maybe I was. But I wasn't wrong. They didn't laugh because it was funny. They laughed because they could. Because I wasn't married. Because I didn't have a husband standing beside me. Because I didn't bring a casserole or a monogrammed onesie or a cute story about diaper disasters. I brought silence. And people hate when you bring silence to a place they're trying to fill with lies. The air smelled like buttercream and plastic, the kind of scent that clung to chairs and church halls after every family function. It used to smell like belonging. Now it just smelled like evidence. A little boy ran past, nearly knocking over a pitcher of lemonade. His mother grabbed his shoulder and hissed, "Be careful around guests." I wasn't sure if she meant the drink table or me. Guest, not family. I let that word settle. It didn't hurt as much as it used to. Not because it wasn't true, but because I was starting to see the freedom in it. When people stop pretending you belong, they give you permission to stop pretending too. They made a joke out of my absence. They were about to learn what presence feels like. I stepped away from the noise, pretending I needed the bathroom, though nobody asked where I was going. That's the perk of being forgettable. They let you vanish without question. The hallway off the reception was dimmer, quieter, and smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and musty hymnals. I leaned against the wall for a moment, breathing in silence like it was the only honest thing left in the building. To my right, someone had set up a small display board labeled Family Memories. It leaned against a stack of cardboard boxes and was covered in photos, clipped with gold pins and dried eucalyptus. I didn't go looking for pain, but pain has a way of finding you when you finally stop moving. My fingers hovered over a picture that made the air in my chest still. It was my living room, my couch, my belly, but not my face. The frame captured me at 7 months pregnant, resting on the edge of that blue linen sofa I used to love. I was wearing a soft gray t-shirt stretched over my stomach, one hand cradling the curve, a blurry book open in the other. I remember Vera had stopped by that day, uninvited, and picked up my phone to snap a picture without asking. I hadn't thought much of it then. In the version on this board, the photo had been cropped, so my head was out of frame completely. Centered in the shot was Vera, sitting next to me. Well, next to the stomach, with a toy in her lap, smiling like it was hers to claim. I hadn't seen that photo since I left. They kept it, not as a memory of me, but as evidence of something else entirely. I backed away a step. My shoulder brushed a folding chair, and I froze. A voice whispered from the opposite side of the boxes. "It's true, you know. She was pregnant once, but the baby didn't survive, poor thing." A second voice, softer. "Really? I thought she just moved away." I didn't move, didn't breathe. That was Aunt Marion. I'd know that hushed tone anywhere. She sounded like she was talking about a neighbor's cat, not a human being. The baby didn't survive. My jaw clenched so hard I could feel it echo in my temple. He survived. I survived. What didn't survive was their narrative if they let that truth live. I didn't turn around. I didn't correct her. There was nothing I could say in that moment that wouldn't come out cracked and louder than I wanted. But my hands were already shaking, not with fear, not even with rage. With clarity. They hadn't forgotten me. They had rewritten me. They didn't bury the pain. They scrubbed it down, sprayed it with lavender, and painted over it like the truth had never existed. I wasn't erased. I was edited. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. My fingers typed faster than I thought they could. Me. They're not just lying. They built something from the lie. Ronan's reply came almost immediately. "Ronan, then it's time to knock the structure down." My thumb hovered over the keyboard. Then I typed, "Copy that," because I was done being the silent error in their history. If they had a version of the past that felt cleaner, more photogenic, easier to swallow, I was about to give them a taste of something real. They thought they'd buried the truth deep enough. They forgot I took a copy with me when I left. I walked back into the reception like someone slipping into a coat that didn't fit anymore. The light had changed, brighter now through the stained glass. Or maybe it was just that I had stopped pretending it was warm. The chatter had quieted, replaced by the soft hum of instrumental music drifting from a speaker near the podium. People gathered around the projector screen, now cycling through a slideshow, pictures fading in and out like memories trying to hold themselves together. I didn't mean to stop and watch, but I did. The first few images were typical: Vera and Ezra at the pumpkin patch, a Christmas photo in matching plaid pajamas, beach pictures where everyone somehow looked like they were posing for a toothpaste ad. Then came more familiar events. 4th of July 2015, my pie on the table. Thanksgiving 2016, my centerpiece. New Year's 2017, the candle holders I had painted by hand. But I wasn't in any of them, not even in the background. It wasn't just cropping, it was curation. An edit so clean you wouldn't know I was ever part of the frame. I turned toward the person running the slideshow, Tara, one of my younger cousins who worked in graphic design now. She was adjusting the clicker with a mild look of boredom. "Hey, who picked the photos?" I asked, as casually as I could manage. She looked up, blinking behind her oversized glasses. "Oh, Vera sent me a flash drive last week. She said she had everything organized already. Of course she did. No one else added anything? I asked. Tara shrugged. Not that I know of. I mean, there wasn't really time. Vera said she had the best versions. Best versions. The words didn't leave a bruise. They went deeper than that, like a chisel taken to bone. Another image filled the screen, and this time I didn't breathe. It was Vera, sitting in a sun-drenched armchair, holding a newborn. The same baby blanket I had knitted by hand was tucked around the infant's legs. My design, my stitches, and the baby, my son. My son. The faint scar over his left eyebrow, the one he got when he fell against a drawer handle at age 1. There it was. Small, but unmistakable. Below the photo, the caption read, "Baby shower, Vera's first time holding her godson." I gripped the back of a chair, steadying myself. A woman nearby, probably one of Vera's friends, leaned in toward another guest and whispered, "He looks just like her, doesn't he?" My stomach knotted so tight I thought I might pass out. He doesn't look like her. He looks like me. But they wouldn't say that, because to them, that version of the story wasn't convenient. I backed away, letting the chair go, suddenly aware of how stiff my arms had become. My pulse throbbed behind my ears, not in panic, but in something sharper, a clarity I hadn't let myself fully sit with until now. They didn't just cut me out of photos. They used my child to frame a better story. A story where Vera was the glowing maternal figure, where I was a name that didn't belong in the family slide deck, where the blanket was just a pretty accessory, not an act of love tied together during sleepless nights while worrying about custody and diapers and formula and where I'd be living next week. I stepped back until the slideshow faded from my view. My hands itched to do something, to tear down the screen, to shout, to throw a chair. But instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone again. Ronin hadn't moved far. He knew me well enough to give space without stepping too far away. I tapped out a message. Me. They didn't just erase me, they used him to complete her story. He responded in less than a minute. Ronin. Then we give them a new ending, one they can't crop. My fingers hovered over the keyboard again, but this time I didn't need to say more. The reply was already written in my chest. I turned toward the front of the room again, eyes narrowing, scanning the faces of people who still didn't see me, some who never had. That was about to change. The slideshow faded to black, but the taste in my mouth was bitter as ever. I moved back toward the main reception area, letting the crowd drift around me like I wasn't in the way. I wasn't really. That was the whole point, wasn't it? Vera had taken her place in front of the gift table like a pageant queen on Coronation Day. The chair she sat in was a plush velvet piece, not church property, definitely brought in for aesthetics. There were fresh peonies in vases beside her, and a banner behind her that read, "Blessed and Beyond." Someone queued up a piano instrumental version of "You Are My Sunshine." She picked up each gift with the grace of a woman who'd practiced this moment. She beamed, paused for photographs, nodded at compliments like she was absorbing their shine. I lingered near the edge, pretending to be interested in the tissue paper explosions and faux surprise gasps. Then I saw it. My gift. The cream-colored box I had wrapped myself in brown craft paper, tied with cotton twine, sealed with a wax stamp. A blanket I'd knit over countless late nights, each row a small rebellion against being forgotten. Vera peeled the paper slowly, lifting the soft bundle of ivory and blue yarn. Her eyes widened at the right time. "Oh my goodness!" she gasped, holding the blanket up so everyone could see the detailing. "This is stunning," the crowd cooed. Then the host, a woman Vera's age I didn't recognize, smiled at the mic. "This one's from Emily, right? Vera's friend from the junior league?" I froze. Across the room, Emily looked up from her seat near the punch table, startled. She blinked, half laughed, then glanced at me and shook her head subtly. An "I didn't say that" kind of gesture. But she didn't speak. I felt something inside me sink, not collapse, not shatter, Just sink, like a stone dropping into a lake so still it barely made a ripple. I turned, walked back toward the table where the opened gifts were being stored. My name should have been on that card. It wasn't. I looked again, calmly, almost too calmly. No sign of the envelope I'd written in cursive, "To Ezra, from Aunt Iris." I had tucked it neatly under the ribbon. It should have been right there. I scanned the nearby trash bin, and there it was. Crumpled under a stack of napkins, half soaked with condensation, was the envelope. The wax seal cracked, my handwriting smudged. It had been ripped open, glanced at, or maybe not even read, and tossed. My heart didn't race. My eyes didn't blur. This time, the betrayal didn't feel like a fall. It felt like confirmation. I reached in, pulled it out, wiped the corner with my thumb. A server nearby glanced at me, then looked away quickly, pretending she hadn't seen. I smoothed the envelope flat, folded it into my purse, and zipped it shut like tucking in a secret I refused to let rot. You won't steal my love for him, I thought. Not twice. As I turned back toward my seat, a voice stopped me. Wasn't that your blanket? It was my cousin's daughter, Harper, I think. Maybe 13, maybe 14. She had braces and a firm way of speaking, like she hadn't yet been taught to soften her curiosity. I looked at her, and I didn't hesitate. It was, I said. But love doesn't need credit, just memory. She nodded like she understood something, even if not everything, and that was enough. I sat back down, the chatter around me resuming as if nothing had cracked, but my focus was sharper than it had been all morning. The fog had cleared. My heart wasn't bruised anymore. It was busy. I pulled out my phone again and opened a new note. Title: Undone by Design. Body: They erased my name. They're about to hear my voice. I walked out the side door of the reception hall just as someone was offering Vera another round of applause. The air outside hit different, cooler, sharper, like it had been waiting for me to stop pretending I didn't need it. The parking lot was quiet, save for the occasional sound of a trunk slamming shut or a baby fussing in a car seat. I walked toward my car, keys in hand, not in a rush, but with purpose. My heels clicked against the asphalt in a rhythm steadier than my pulse. When I reached the driver's door, I didn't get in. I leaned against it, took a long breath, then opened the glove compartment. I pulled out the worn tan folder I hadn't touched in months. I brought it with me on instinct, a just-in-case kind of thing. Turns out instincts are just the truth whispering before it screams. Inside the folder was a single piece of paper, folded and creased from being handled too many times. The birth certificate, Silas Delara, date of birth, time, place, but under mother's name, Vera Stokely. The page didn't shake in my hands. I did. Not from surprise, not even from pain, but from the rage that came with finally accepting what you've known all along, but tried to forgive before you were ready. I blinked back the heat building behind my eyes and let the memory come without a fight. The hospital room had been too white, too cold. I'd just delivered after 17 hours of labor and 2 blood transfusions. I was tired, alone, and the nurse said something like, "It's just temporary, just until you're stable." Callista was standing near the window, arms crossed, voice even. "You're not ready yet, Iris. Vera can help, for now. We'll fix it later. You just need rest." They said it would be easier this way, less paperwork, no drama. I signed the form with trembling fingers. I didn't read the whole page. I didn't ask for a copy. I just wanted to hold my baby, but they'd already handed him to Vera. Back in the present, I ran my fingers along the edge of the certificate. My name wasn't missing by accident. It was gone by design, and still, my signature was there. Black ink, uneven from a weak grip, but mine. They made it look like compassion. What it was control. I stepped back from the car, holding the paper like a quiet weapon. I took a photo with my phone, just in case anyone needed proof later. Then I sent it to Ronan with one line. Me. Today is not ending the way they planned. No emojis, no follow-up. I folded the certificate again, this time more carefully, and slid it back into the folder. The zipper on my purse felt louder than it should have when I closed it. As I walked back toward the reception, the buzz of the crowd returned like static. I moved through the small clusters of guests without brushing anyone, invisible as always, but now by choice. Near the doorway, I saw Vera. She was standing by the mimosa station, one hand on a flute of champagne, the other gesturing to someone I didn't recognize. Her laugh floated across the room, polished and practiced. A laugh made for brunches and benefit galas. Then our eyes met. She froze first. I didn't break stride. Her smile faltered, just a flicker. She didn't say anything, neither did I. But something passed between us, something heavier than words, quieter than shame. She looked away first, and that was all the confirmation I needed. I didn't slow down as I passed Vera. I moved through the room like a shadow slipping into its rightful place, unnoticed but present. The dessert table was still untouched, a sad little island of untouched lemon tarts and melting mini cheesecakes. I stood beside it, pretending to read the flavor tags while scanning the room. The family trivia game was starting. Vera's voice floated over the crowd like syrup. "All right, who remembers which cousin took Ezra to the zoo for the first time?" A handful of people chuckled and called out wrong names, and Vera corrected them with a laugh that sounded like applause in a room full of mirrors. I stayed near the desserts, one step outside the spotlight, exactly where they preferred me. Silas tugged at my wrist, pointing at the lemon tarts. I bent down to grab one, and as I handed it to him, he grinned, bouncing on his toes. "Look, Mommy, they have the kind you like." Everything stopped. The conversations, the trivia, even the music. It was like someone had unplugged the entire event. Silas's voice echoed in the sudden quiet, loud and bright and innocent. "Mommy." People turned, heads swiveled. Vera dropped her flashcards. Callista froze mid-sentence, lips parted as if the air had caught there and refused to move. A cousin covered her mouth. Someone whispered, "Did he say?" I straightened slowly, hand still on Silas's shoulder. Vera was already moving, crossing the room with that brisk, practiced urgency that mothers save for messes. She crouched in front of Silas, her smile stretched too wide, eyes darting toward the watching crowd. "Hey, sweetheart," she said in that voice she used with donors and photographers. "Remember what we talked about? Not here, okay?" Silas blinked, confused. The kind of confusion only a child feels when someone he trusts tells him that truth is suddenly wrong. I stepped between them without raising my voice. "Let him speak," I said, firm and even. For once, Vera stood up, color rising in her cheeks. She looked at me like I'd slapped her, but I wasn't interested in sparring. Someone nearby tried to chuckle. "Kids say the funniest things." Silas looked up at me, then at the crowd, then at Vera. He hesitated only a second. "But she told me not to call her Mommy," he said. "She said it would make people upset." There it was. Not a scream. Not a confrontation. Just a truth spoken in the voice of someone who hadn't yet learned how to lie. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was seismic. Aunt Marion's teacup rattled as she set it down. The piano player stopped mid-measure. Someone near the buffet whispered, "Oh my God!" No one laughed. Vera's face was blank, a porcelain mask with no cracks. Yet. Callista avoided eye contact, pretending to adjust her necklace. No one moved to cover for them. No one defended. I looked around and saw them, all the people who had helped stitch the narrative. Each one standing still, mouths closed, eyes scanning the floor. Even the ones who didn't know the full story had heard enough to know they didn't want their names attached to the wrong side. I bent down, kissed the top of Silas's head, and whispered, "You're okay." Then I stood up and looked Vera in the eye. "Your script doesn't fit me anymore. No yelling, no tears, just a severed cord." I walked back to my seat with Silas beside me, the crowd parting not out of politeness but uncertainty. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clear. I felt done. They wanted to keep the story clean. I was about to hand them the mess they made. The silence didn't settle. It lingered, thick, palpable, buzzing with questions no one wanted to be the first to ask. I sat with Silas beside me, his small fingers curled around the edge of his dessert plate, pushing a crumbling lemon tart back and forth, like he sensed the tension but couldn't name it. I let him have that innocence, even for a little longer. Across the room, Vera had pulled Callista aside. They stood close, backs turned, heads tilted just enough to whisper. I didn't need to hear the words to know they weren't strategizing. They were panicking. The hostess, a thin woman with a clipboard and an over-applied smile, stepped onto the small stage near the floral arch. "Well," she said too brightly, "before we move on to cutting the cake, we'd like to open the mic to anyone who wants to share a memory or a few kind words." A few guests shifted in their chairs. One cousin glanced at another. No one moved. I stood. Not fast. Not dramatic. Just deliberate. All eyes turned toward me, some blinking in confusion, others widening like they were watching a train drift off its rails in slow motion. I didn't wait for the hostess to hand me the mic. I walked up, heels clicking just enough to puncture the stillness, and took it from the stand with both hands. "I wasn't planning to speak today," I began, voice even, calm. "But since so much has already been said about me, I figured it might be time something was said by me." A few heads turned toward Callista and Vera. I didn't follow their gaze. I kept mine fixed on the crowd. "I'm not here to blame anyone," I said, "and I'm not here to beg for space. I did not disappear. I was removed." Murmurs. One woman gasped softly. I let it settle. "And no, I'm not asking to be added back in." My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "I am a mother," I said clearly. "I've always been a mother. You just didn't want that to fit your version of the story." There was no confusion in the room anymore, only realization. I turned slightly, gave a small nod toward the back of the room. Ronan stepped out from the side wall, holding a small remote. A few people jumped. They hadn't noticed him until now. The screen behind me flickered to life. The room went still. It was a video, dimly lit, shot from a phone on a table. Me, sitting in my kitchen, hair up, wearing no makeup. Just a mother, plain and raw and unfiltered. "He was mine," I said in the recording. "They told me I wasn't ready. I was. They told me I'd ruin him. I didn't." The screen cut to a hospital document. A real one. My signature was there, slightly blurred from poor lighting, but still legible. Ronan had added soft captions for clarity. They said it would be temporary, that it was for the best, that family protects family, but they didn't protect me. They replaced me. The sound wasn't loud, but in that silence, it was deafening. Back in the room, someone gasped. A soft, "Oh my God," came from the second row. Emily, the one who'd been credited for my blanket, put a hand to her mouth and began to cry. A girl in the back, maybe another cousin's kid, quietly lifted her phone and started recording the screen. No one stopped her. The video ended with one last sentence, my voice lower than before. "I signed to protect him. They used it to erase me." I let the silence stretch just long enough to hold. Then I handed the mic back to the hostess. No one clapped. I didn't wait for them to. I turned to leave the stage but paused halfway. "This wasn't for you to understand," I said over my shoulder. "It was for him to hear someday, and for me to stop whispering." Then I walked back to my seat, sat beside Silas, and took his hand. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. I sat back in my chair, Silas beside me, our hands still laced together. He kept his focus on a juice box, gently pressing it between his palms until the straw rose like a periscope. The room hadn't moved in minutes. No clapping, no murmurs of, "How brave," none of the shallow affirmations people often toss around when they witness pain they weren't ready to acknowledge. Vera stayed frozen in place, lips parted, hands clenched in her lap like she was deciding whether to stand or vanish. Callista's posture didn't change, but her eyes darted, restless, calculating. I stood up, not to leave, just to breathe, and walked a few steps to the back wall, where someone had left a half-empty water bottle on a folding chair. I sipped from it, scanning the room. People had started to whisper again, but the energy had shifted. Less judgment, more unease. Then a voice cut through, clear and composed. "Iris, may I speak?" I turned. The voice belonged to a man near the coat rack. He stepped forward slowly, not rushed, not hesitant. Gray slacks, tan blazer, wire-rimmed glasses that had seen more truth than most people in that room ever dared to admit. It was Thatcher Roan. The room didn't know what to make of him. Half the guests didn't recognize him, and the half who did exchanged tight glances like someone had just unsealed a document meant to stay locked. He looked at me, not for permission, but for presence, and then faced the crowd. "I was there," he began, "the day Iris signed that paper." A ripple moved through the audience. She wasn't sedated, she wasn't hysterical, she was tired, raw, newly stitched and holding onto the edge of her own voice. He didn't raise his tone. He didn't embellish. But his words landed like footsteps on a frozen lake, measured, echoing. She cried, not from confusion, but from betrayal, from being told that signing away her rights was love, that her silence was sacrifice. I watched Vera's face harden. Callista looked away. "I stayed silent," Thatcher continued, "because I thought it was family business. I thought I was being respectful. But silence helped no one. Especially not her. Especially not that boy." He nodded gently toward Silas, who was now quietly sucking his juice box with no idea he was at the center of something seismic. A beat passed, then another. The hostess stepped back without a word. No clipboard, no forced smile. Someone whispered near the drinks table, "Who is he?" A woman answered, "Her father's friend, the lawyer." And just like that, the narrative broke. I didn't move. I didn't thank him. I didn't need to. This wasn't about validation. It wasn't about someone saving me. It was about someone finally refusing to help them hide. People started shifting, physically and emotionally. A cousin, who hadn't spoken to me since the baby shower I wasn't invited to, looked over and gave a small nod. Not apology, recognition. Aunt Marion straightened her posture, eyes clouded. Vera's gaze was locked on a spot of frosting on the cake table, her jaw tight with tension she hadn't trained for. "Callista?" She stared at Thatcher like he had just unraveled years of her architecture, and maybe he had. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I met Thatcher's eyes, nodded once. It wasn't a thank you. It was an acknowledgement of what truth sounds like when it's finally spoken aloud. They built their safety on silence, I thought, and it finally spoke. I stepped out into the hallway, leaving behind the lingering weight of Thatcher's voice and the still settling dust of exposed truth. The chatter had resumed inside, but it was clipped now, uncertain. Laughter came in short, self-conscious bursts. Nobody mentioned cake. No one reached for the camera to capture the final group photos. Even the decorations seemed to sag, like they'd overheard too much. The hallway was cooler, shaded from the afternoon sun by old stained glass windows that filtered light into tired shades of gold and blue. I didn't walk far, just far enough to let the walls absorb the noise I no longer needed to hold. Then I heard her. Callista. She was standing with a few relatives, Vera's niece included. Their huddle was small, hushed, but not quiet enough. "It got out of hand," Callista muttered, but Iris never really acted like a mother. The girl beside her shifted awkwardly. Callista added, "We just tried to keep things calm." I nodded, because Vera needed someone to hold it together. There it was. Not shouted. Not cruel. Just enough poison to leave a mark. I didn't turn around. I didn't call her out. What would have been the point? That nod, years ago in a hospital room, wasn't a slip. It was strategy. You didn't scream at me. You didn't strike me, you just nodded. And that did more damage than any insult. That's how people like Callista operate. Not with fists or names, but with smiles and silence. With phrases like, for the good of the family, and let's not make this harder than it has to be. But the damage is the same. As I started to step forward, someone tapped my shoulder gently. It was Emily. "Iris," she said, voice soft, eyes slightly damp. "About the blanket. I knew it wasn't from me. I should have said something." I looked at her, not with anger, but clarity. "Next time," I said, "say it louder, for whoever's watching." She nodded, shame flickering behind her mascara. Then she squeezed my hand and walked back toward the reception, shoulders a little straighter than when she'd approached. The hallway wasn't empty for long. A man I barely recognized from Vera's side of the family offered me a ride, just in case I didn't want to deal with the exit crowd. I declined. Another cousin, not one I was close with, murmured, "We should talk sometime," no specifics. But the tone had changed, micro shifts, quiet repositioning. They weren't ready to pick a side, but they were stepping away from the one they'd been fed. Inside, I could see through the glass. Vera now sat alone. People drifted toward the cake, but no one stood near her. She wasn't the center anymore. She scrolled her phone like she was busy, eyes moving too fast to be reading. Maybe searching for a narrative that still worked. Maybe just avoiding the one playing out around her. Callista lingered by the exit, lips pressed into a line, watching everything but seeing nothing. The empire she'd spent years managing, through dinner seating charts, baby name suggestions, and passive-aggressive holiday texts, was unraveling thread by thread, not with fireworks, but with facts, and nods that no longer carried weight. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need a mic. The echo of their withheld approval had turned against them. That was enough. By the time the sun began to drift low across the parking lot, the crowd had thinned into ones and twos. A few guests stood by their cars, still murmuring in hushed voices, like speaking too loudly might bring everything crashing down again. I walked out through the side doors with Silas's backpack slung over one shoulder and his jacket bundled under my arm. No one offered to help. No one asked if we needed a ride. And I didn't expect them to. Ronan had already pulled the car close to the curb, engine running quiet, hazard lights blinking like a heartbeat that had steadied itself. He stepped out as I approached, said nothing, just opened the back door. Silas climbed in cheerfully, as if this were any other Saturday afternoon. He had no idea the tectonic shift that had taken place inside that church, and maybe that was the point. My job wasn't to make him understand it now. My job was to make sure he wouldn't have to fight the same battles I had. As I rounded the front of the car, I saw him. My father. He stood just off the steps near the church entrance, hands tucked deep into the pockets of a coat I hadn't seen him wear in years. Navy blue, fraying at the cuffs, the one he used to throw on when he went out to the yard after dinner. He wasn't talking to anyone, just standing there, watching the parking lot like it owed him an explanation. I paused, and for a breath, our eyes met. Just one beat, not long enough for anything to pass between us, except air and every missed moment we'd never name. Then he looked away. That was it. No gesture, no apology, no, "I'm proud of you," whispered under breath. Just a glance. Then nothing. And somehow, it was enough. That was the last piece I needed to set down. Not as anger, not even as disappointment, just as acknowledgement that this was the full story. Some people choose absence not out of hatred, but out of habit, and some of us choose not to chase them anymore. I slid into the front seat, shut the door behind me, and exhaled through my nose. Ronan didn't ask what had happened. He just looked at me for a moment before saying, "You don't owe anyone the last word." I nodded, slow and certain. That's why I left before they could give it. We didn't rush to pull away. Silas was buckling himself in, humming softly to a song only he could hear. I turned around and checked his seatbelt, brushing a crumb from his collar. "You good, buddy?" He nodded, mouth full of the last bite of cake. Ronan eased the car into drive, and the church began to recede behind us. No one waved goodbye. No one chased after us in tears. It was the kind of ending that doesn't ask for permission, only direction. I didn't look back, not once. Because sometimes, freedom doesn't look like a fight. It looks like leaving without needing applause. It looks like stepping into the driver's seat of your own story and choosing where it goes next. The truth was mine again, and this time, I was taking it home. The groceries rustled softly as Ronan set the last paper bag down on the kitchen counter. I watched him from the doorway, Silas sprawled on the living room rug behind me, humming while he built a fortress from couch cushions and worn-out wooden blocks. It had been 5 days since the baptism. 5 days since everything cracked. 5 days since I stopped needing to explain myself. The house was still. Not heavy, just quiet in a way that didn't demand noise. I walked past the counter, the faint smell of cilantro and roasted chicken mixing with lemon dish soap, and something uniquely ours. Comfort, not performance. Ronan looked over his shoulder. "There's mango yogurt in the fridge. Silas's reward for surviving a war he didn't know he was in." I smiled. Not because it was funny, but because he knew how to keep a space soft. I carried my laptop to the couch, flipped it open, and waited as it warmed up. The screen greeted me with a thumbnail, still paused at the end of the video we'd played in front of that room. I hadn't watched it since that day, but tonight I let it play. There I was, blurry, raw, unscripted. Tired? Yes. But not broken. Not invisible. The clip neared the end. My voice quieted, and then came his. Silas's voice, barely above a whisper, but clear as a bell. "I made this for my mom, because she's brave." I didn't cry. I just closed the laptop gently, like sealing something precious I no longer needed to defend. My inbox pinged. A single new message. From Callista subject. "We should talk." I stared at it. Not with dread, not with hope, just observation. I didn't delete it, but I didn't open it either. Some doors don't need to be slammed, just never unlocked again. I stood and walked down the hallway to my bedroom closet, opening the top drawer where I'd tucked away the blanket, my blanket, neatly folded and now finally free of confusion. I pulled out a small keepsake box and placed the blanket inside, along with the drawing Silas made the week before the baptism. 3 stick figures, 1 tall, 1 medium, 1 small, all holding hands. Underneath, he'd written in crooked letters, "Us." I grabbed a pen and a small tag and wrote, "Not forgotten, just finally acknowledged." I closed the lid and ran my hand over the wood grain. My fingerprints didn't need to scream. They just needed to remain. Later, I curled into the corner of the couch with my phone, opened the Notes app, and typed, "Bravery isn't always about confrontation. Sometimes it's about staying visible in a room designed to erase you." I hit save, set the phone down, and let myself be still. Silas climbed into my lap, breath warm against my neck, his fingers wrapping around mine like it was the most natural thing in the world. Ronan handed me a mug of tea, chamomile with too much honey, just the way I liked it. We didn't speak, we didn't need to, because sometimes closure doesn't arrive with fanfare or forgiveness. Sometimes it comes in the form of quiet, held without apology. I was never childless. I was just invisible to the wrong people.